Okay, recording has begun.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. My name is Miran Kalajian, and I am the e-board member for the DFI LA, and I am also the chair of the Education and the Civic Engagement. I would like to take this moment and to say thank you to all of you for attending tonight's event under the patronage of the education and bringing the series of education events to everyone. I would like also to take a moment and say thank you to everyone who helped us, the Museum of Tolerance, especially to Ms. Libby Graff, the director, who helped me to reach out to Ms. Keren Perlmutter, as well to Ms. Colleen Schwab, who was successfully in reaching out to the Museum of Ronald Reagan to bring their chief of staff as well. Before I open up, I would like to take this opportunity and introduce our president, Mr. Greg Solovitz, to open his remarks. Please, Greg.
Hi there, everybody. Thank you very much for attending. As Miran said, this was the first of what will be a series of events that will have an educational focus. We wanted to kick off with a Holocaust remembrance because, unfortunately, as we move forward in history, it's getting more and more important for us to try to remember the horrible events of the Holocaust, because the new generations, unfortunately, poll after poll shows that they don't know what the Holocaust is. I also want to take a minute to thank LAUSD board member Scott Schmerelson, because yesterday LAUSD became one of the few school districts in the country to have a day off of school for the Armenian genocide remembrance. And many historians feel that the Armenian genocide was the precursor to the Holocaust. It's where Hitler got his idea that nothing happened at Ataturk, so why can't I do it too? And more importantly, when 1.5 million people are killed just because of their ethnicity, it's important for us to remember that and to honor the memories of the Armenians who perished during that genocide. So I wanted to acknowledge that as well. And again, I want to thank you all. Invite you to like our Facebook page, invite you to check on it frequently, because we will list our events there. And again, I want to thank Keren for being here. I'm not even going to attempt to recount the many things you told me, Keren. It's pretty astounding, but what a background you've got. And thanks again, and I'm now going to shut up.
Thank you, Greg. And before I introduce, I want to take a moment and introduce Keren. Keren Perlmutter, she's a PhD, an award-winning scientist, filmmaker, publisher, and public speaker. She obtained her Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from UCLA and her MS in Electrical Engineering, MS in Statistics, and PhD in Electrical Engineering from Stanford University. She was chief scientist and head of an international research and development division at AOL. She also developed the revolutionary ultra-resolution film restoration process for Warner Brothers. Keren is a published author of many technical papers and has won numerous academic awards. She has also been granted 39 patents for her inventions. More recently, she edited and published her father's #1 best-selling autobiography, Determined, the story of Holocaust survivor Abraham Perlmutter, in English and in Dutch, and she created the award-winning documentary of the same name. She continues to share her father's life story by speaking at museums, schools, and other venues. She is also actively involved with multiple nonprofit organizations dedicated to Holocaust education, Holocaust survivor support, and other humanitarian causes. I'm going to give you the floor, Keren, to start with your presentation.
Well, thank you, Miran. And I'm just going to see if I can, I can share my presentation. Okay. And welcome, everyone. And I'm pleased to be sharing the life story of my father, Holocaust survivor, Dr. Abraham Perlmutter. I'm going to start by showing a trailer for my documentary on his life story.
I actually saw Hitler coming by.
Our store was broken in and plundered. All of a sudden, I saw Germans. They grabbed me. I managed to get loose and ran back. I could not get out during the daytime. I said, I'm Jewish. The Germans are after me. Can you help me? He said, sure, come in.
So I will now more fully relate my father's life story and then talk about some of its important messages and how I'm currently sharing it. And then I'll open up to questions. So my father was born in Vienna, Austria in 1927, and he lived with his parents and his 3-year older sister, Taya, and they were raised in a very Orthodox Jewish household. Now, my father was a wild child. For example, when he was 2.5 years old, he ran away from home. At the time, he was watched by a nanny because his parents went to work at their textile store. And my father would look out the window and see all the kids play and wanted to do that too, but he was too small to open the door. So one day he decided to throw a ball out the window and he asked the nanny if she could open the door so he could go out and get the ball. But instead of getting the ball, he just ran away. And he went a few blocks and he was stopped by a policeman who asked him for his name and his address. He didn't know his address. He was 2.5 years old. So the policeman took him to the police station. And at the end of the day, when his parents found out he wasn't at home, his mother went to the police station and was happy to find him there. Another example of when he was mischievous occurred when he was in 1st grade and 6 years old. At the time, he misbehaved and he was told to stand in a corner in front of the class. But instead of standing still, he slowly moved from one corner to the other. And all the kids were watching him instead of the teacher. So the teacher was not happy about that. So the teacher took a stick out from his desk, told my father to come over and to put out his hands because he was going to hit him with a stick because you were allowed to do that back then. But every time he tried to hit my father's hands, my father pulled his hands away. And so the teacher was frustrated and he sent my father to the principal. And at the end of the day, my father went back to the empty classroom and broke the stick in half. And the end result was my father was told he wasn't allowed to go back to the same school the following year. And the reason we like to tell these stories is because these personality characteristics, being wild and mischievous and wanting to escape, these helped him to survive later on during the Holocaust. So life was relatively normal for him until March 12, 1938, when Germany announced the Anschluss or union with Austria. 2 days later, my father saw a large crowd gathering on one of the main streets, and he went to see what was going on. And he actually saw Adolf Hitler entering Vienna. My father was 10.5 years old at the time. So after the Anschluss, the situation became very bad for the Jews. At the time, Vienna had about 175,000 Jews who were well integrated into society, but almost immediately after the Nazis gained control, the Jews were attacked and they were subject to the Nuremberg laws, which were a set of anti-Semitic and racist laws that were passed in Germany in 1935. And Jews were subjected to many forms of humiliation, including being forced to scrub pavements with small brushes. And the worsening conditions were epitomized by Kristallnacht, which occurred on the night of November 9th to 10th, 1938. And on that night, many Jews in both Germany and Austria were attacked and arrested, 6,000 in Vienna, and Jewish businesses and synagogues were destroyed. And the night was called Kristallnacht, or the night of broken glass, because of the destruction that occurred. And that night, my grandparents sent my father to check on their textile store, and he saw that their store had been vandalized, as was one of the synagogues that my father attended. And as he was returning home, he saw that his uncle and his father were being beaten up by Nazis, but luckily they were let go. So my grandparents, similar to most of the Jews in the country, were desperately trying to leave Austria, but their visas were repeatedly denied. And at the time, the majority of countries closed their borders, including the United States. And as you know, Israel did not exist at the time. The British controlled the area and they restricted Jewish immigration there. So Jews couldn't flee there. But after Kristallnacht, though, the British government did ease immigration restrictions to allow unaccompanied minors, children, to go to the United Kingdom on what was called the Kinder Transport, which was a children's transport operation. And about 10,000 children went to the United Kingdom. And there were also some other countries that let in kids, including the Netherlands, who let in about 2,000. So, and my father had an Aunt Annie who lived in the Netherlands at the time. And so his parents decided to send him and his sister on the Kinder Transport to the Netherlands. They thought it would be safe because the Netherlands had been neutral during World War I. They thought it would continue to be so. So on January 11th, 1939, when my father was 11 years old, he and his sister went on the Kinder Transport. And that was actually the last time that he saw his mother. And so they went on this train. They went from Vienna through Austria to Germany. Finally, they arrived on the Dutch-German border, and the German soldiers went aboard to make sure that there weren't any adults aboard. There weren't any. And then they went to the Dutch side. And then my father and the rest of the kids breathed a sigh of relief. But first, they weren't allowed to be released. The Dutch government did not release them to their relatives. Instead, they went to a camp set up specifically for Jewish refugee children. And the first place they went to was called Wijk aan Zee, and it was run by nuns, and they were really wonderful for the kids. And they even encouraged the kids to say their prayers in their own language. And so my father was there for a short while, and then he was moved to another refugee camp in a place called Drybergen. And there they had a soccer team. So my father joined that. He was happy about that. But after a few months, he was moved to another refugee camp in a place called Amerongen. And then shortly after that, he was moved to another refugee camp in a place called Gouda, which is Gouda, where the cheese is from. But there was an epidemic of diphtheria. And so my father got sick and he was sent to a hospital in Amsterdam and quarantined there. And until he recovered. And after that, he was finally allowed to be released to his relatives in The Hague in December 1939. So almost a year after he arrived in the Netherlands. And in the meantime, his sister went to a place called Lustrecht. It was a pioneer camp, and they were training children 14 years and older for life in the British Mandate of Palestine. And so my father couldn't go there because he was only 12 at the time, but she was 15. And she was preparing to go there since toward the end of 1939, their parents, my grandparents, were actually able to flee Vienna and make their way to the British Mandate of Palestine. So my father stayed with his uncle's sister's family. They were called the Van Straten, since other relatives from Vienna were actually staying with his Aunt Annie at the time. So he was able to enjoy a normal life and go back to school for a short while, but only 6 months later, in May 1940, Germany invaded the Netherlands, and after 5 days, the Dutch surrendered, and now my father and aunt were trapped in the Netherlands, and they couldn't join their parents in the British Mandate of Palestine. The situation slowly began to deteriorate for the Jews there. In October 1940, Dutch Jews were dismissed from civil service and banned from universities. Jews were banned from restaurants and movie theaters and hotels. Jews and Jewish businesses had to be registered. In September 1941, Jewish students were excluded from public schools. So my father went to a Jewish-only school for a short time. By the end of April 1942, all Jews had to wear a yellow star saying Jude, which is Jew in Dutch, on their clothing. And in 1942, also, all non-Dutch Jews were ordered to go to Amsterdam. So my father was a non-Dutch Jew, So in the fall of 1942, he was ordered to leave The Hague and his relatives and go to Amsterdam as well. And he went over there and he stayed with a family called Cohen. She was a widow and she had 2 adult sons with her. And he didn't know them beforehand, but they were kind enough to let him in. And the location was actually close to where Anne Frank was hiding at the time, because it was within the Jewish quarter. And he was able to go to school for very briefly, but then all Jewish schools were forced to close. And in the meantime, every day, the Nazis would pick up Jews and bring them to a deportation center, which they renamed the Jewish Theater. And from there, between 60 to 80,000 Jews were deported, first to Westerbork, which was a Dutch transit camp, and then to an extermination camp, either Auschwitz or Sobibor. And a few months after my father arrived, in March 1943, when he was 15 and a half years old, the Nazis came to the Cohen house looking specifically for my father. They took him and one of the adult Cohen sons and brought them to the Jewish theater. And when my father, he saw hundreds of people sitting there, very sad and resigned. No one knew exactly what was going to happen, but they knew it wouldn't be good. So I'm going to let him tell what happened next in the following clip.
My idea was not to be shipped off. I looked around and I saw there were a number of exits, and every exit was manned by a couple of soldiers, German soldiers. And every couple of hours, they changed. Another group of soldiers came over there. Sometimes the 2 of them went to get the next group. When that occurred, I said, hey, that's an opportunity, okay? I mentioned this to one of the Cohen fellows. I said, hey, let's get out of here next time when that happens. Oh, no, it's too dangerous, they'll shoot us. Well, I didn't care. Next time it happened, I took off. I ran back to the Cohen family house.
So my father later found out that unfortunately the Cohen son, who didn't want to join him in his escape, was killed in a concentration camp soon after. So when my father arrived at the Cohen house, Mrs. Cohen said, well, you can't stay here. The Nazis are going to come back looking for you. So my father hid in the bushes in the backyard that night, and he was trying to figure out his next move. And luckily, the very next morning, a lady came from an underground organization, and she came looking for him and asked him if he wanted to go into hiding. Well, how did that happen? Well, it turns out that, remember, his sister was in the Lustreth pioneer camp. So the counselor of that camp had found out that the Nazis were going to deport all of the children. And so they contacted a man they knew called Yup Westerville, who was head of an underground organization called the Westerville Group. And they hid all of the kids from that camp. So then my aunt asked them, well, can you see if my brother, so that's what she said. So in other words, my father, she knew he was in Amsterdam, but not that he had been arrested or that he had escaped, but she knew he was in Amsterdam. So she asked the group, can you see if he wants to go in hiding? And luckily, the lady came just a few hours after he escaped. And so she told him to meet her at the train station, and he carefully wove his way through the streets. It was very dangerous. Nazis were patrolling there. He arrived at the train station. He was nervous because he had dark hair and the Dutch are mostly blonde, and he saw Nazis looking at him. But luckily, the lady came, the train came, and she directed him to another city, to another address. He followed her instructions. He came to a house. And the couple, after he knocked on the door, a couple answered, and they were expecting him. And they said, come on in. But he was only there for about a half an hour when he heard boots. The Nazis always wore boots. So my father knew when they were coming. So he immediately went to look for a hiding place. And there was a bedroom. He went in there and he saw there was a lady sleeping in the bed. On each side of the bed, there was a closet. So he went into the closet furthest from the entrance of the room and hid behind some clothes. And so he heard the Nazis enter the house. And then, well, I'm going to let him say what happened next.
I heard one German coming into the bedroom that I was. I heard him opening up the door of the closet, of the other closet. I heard him walking around the bed. And the same time, I got the hiccups. I started choking myself. And I heard him opening up the door. And instead of looking around, just opened it and he closed it, and with a curse, he went away.
But they said they were going to come back. So then my father found another hiding place in a coal box in the backyard. He asked the couple to quickly hide him with the coal. He could barely breathe in there. And the Nazis did come back, and they didn't find him that time, but they said they were going to come back the next morning. It was late at night at that point. And so he, thanked the couple and decided, well, it's not safe to stay here. So he went a few doors down and he just knocked on a random door. And I'm going to let him say what happened next in the following clip. Just going to play it. Second, here we go.
Out came a young man. And he said, "Who are you?" I said, "Listen, I'm Jewish. The Germans are after me. Can you help me?" He said, "Sure, come in." Now, this was symptomatic. Many Dutch endangered their lives. He had a family, had a small kid, a wife. He told me to go into the basement, okay? He was putting me under a bunch of blankets, okay? And I stayed there during the night. I become emotional when I talk about people who are complete strangers, who endanger their lives, the lives of their families, to help somebody they have never met, a Jew that they knew was going to be picked up by the Germans and possibly killed. As time went on, I came to trust more and more the Dutch, because I had a number of such experiences.
So the lady found him the next day and brought him to another village, and turned out that's where his sister was hiding. So he was able to reunite with her for a couple of days. But unfortunately, he found out that that lady who was sleeping in the bed between the closets, the Nazis learned that she was Jewish and then arrested her, and she died in a extermination camp shortly afterwards. So after a few days, where he was with his sister, they were split up again. The underground group sent Taya to Eindhoven, and he went to Rotterdam. And the first place he stayed was in an apartment, and he was instructed to stay away from the windows at all times and to crawl on his hands and knees so no one would see him. And after a couple of weeks there, he was moved to a nearby pension, and there were 2 other boys there and a teacher. And my father didn't have much to do while he was in hiding, so he decided to learn languages. And his first language had been German, and he knew some Hebrew and Yiddish as well. And when he went to the Netherlands, he learned Dutch. So he asked the teacher for a Dutch-English dictionary, and he found out that Dutch was similar to English. So in a few weeks, he learned English. And then he asked for an English-French dictionary, found out that French was similar to English, and in a few weeks, he learned French. And then he asked for a French-Spanish dictionary, and in a few weeks, he saw that Spanish was similar to French. In a few weeks, he learned Spanish. Not how to pronounce it, but, he learned how to read it and understand it. And in the meantime, every day, the teacher would leave the hiding place. Since teacher wanted to write about the conditions of Rotterdam during the war. It's not a smart thing to do. And one day, the teacher was caught by the Nazis and forced to reveal where he had been hiding. But again, my father heard boots, so he knew the Nazis were coming, and he and the kids hid behind, the other 2 boys, hid behind some furniture. And the Nazis came, didn't find them, and left. But my father decided it wouldn't be safe to stay there. So the 3 boys left, but they also decided to split up since they thought it would be safer to do that. My father's about 15, 16 now. But my father had just gone a few blocks when all of a sudden he ran into some Nazi soldiers, and they asked him for his ID, which he didn't have and wouldn't have mattered anyway. So they put him in a police wagon, and the Nazi was in front next to a Dutch driver. In the back, he was sitting on a bench across from 2 Dutch policemen. And his first idea was, well, I have to escape. And he knew that the Dutch were mostly anti-Nazi. So he thought, well, maybe the Dutch policemen wouldn't mind if I tried to escape. And so he slowly started moving toward the rear doors of the police wagon. And the Dutch policemen were just talking to each other, ignored him. He thought, well, that's a good sign. And then when the police wagon slowed to go around the corner, my father pushed open the doors, jumped out, and ran away. And the Dutch policeman didn't start screaming about it until my father was maybe half a block down away from there. So they gave him that much time to run away. And he went up to a random man on the street and he said, I'm Jewish. I just escaped from the Nazis. Can you help me? And the man found a member of the underground group. His name was Jan Smit. And Jan Smit then sent him back to the first apartment in Rotterdam where my father had stayed. So my father was there a short time, and then Jan Smit moved him to Eindhoven, where he again reunited with his sister. In the meantime, the day after he left, the Nazis raided that apartment where he had been, and then the 6 people there were all arrested, and 5 out of the 6 were killed in extermination camps. So after a few days in Eindhoven, my father was instructed to take a train to the city of Venlo, which was in southeastern Netherlands, in the province of Limburg. And he was told somebody would meet him at the train station. So we got there, it was dark and deserted. He was looking around, and suddenly he saw a man coming towards him. And he saw that the man was wearing the clothing of a priest. His name was Pastor Vullings, and he was the local member of the underground, and he was the priest of the village of Groebenvorst. Now, Groebenvorst had about 240 families, and they were very religious Catholics, and they actually saved 42 Jews. So more than 1 out of 6 families was hiding a Jew, and Pastor Vullings was instrumental in making that happen. And so Pastor Vullings put my father on his bicycle and took him to a family that was headed by Gertrude and Peter Byers. They were asparagus farmers, and also living in a house were their 3 adult children. One was Harry, who was the youngest son. He was in his early 20s, and their daughter Mincha was in her early 30s. And my father stayed there for over a year and became very close to the Byers. And he also became an expert at harvesting asparagus. But although the village was anti-Nazi, they hid many Jews, the mayor was pro-Nazi. And whenever he suspected there was a Jew somewhere, he would alert the Nazis. So my father, again, had many close encounters and interactions with the Nazis while hiding there. For example, one time, the Nazi came to the house, lined up the entire Byers family and said, "Where's the Jew? Tell us where he is. If you don't, we're going to arrest all of you." And my father was hiding underneath the floorboards of the Byers' bedroom at the time. But the Byers didn't say anything, and luckily, the Nazis left. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy, France, and pushed through France to Belgium to the Netherlands. And pretty soon, the front of the war actually moved to the province of Limburg, where Groebenvorst was located. And Germans were actually quartered in the village and in the Byers' house. So for a while, my father was hiding in an attic, but then it was too dangerous with Nazis in the house. So then he started hiding in a horse stable. But after a while, it was too dangerous there. So the Byers dug a hole in a hill in their backyard, and my father hid there, and he couldn't even sit up in the hole. And my father used to joke that his only companions were red ants and snails. And in November 1944, the Allies actually liberated the neighboring village of Zevenum, which was just a few miles away. And they were firing artillery shells at Groebenvorst. So the Germans decided to take all the villagers to Germany, which, as you can see from the map, was only a few miles away. But my father obviously didn't want to go with him. with the Nazis. So he returned to the stable, but he could hear shells. He could see explosions and fire, coming closer and closer. And he thought, you know what? I can't stay here. I'm going to try and go toward the British lines and towards Zevenum. And he'd gone maybe 10 feet away when a shell fell on the stable and the whole thing blew up. So he knew that an angel of God was with him and that therefore he had nothing to fear and he should just continue toward the British lines. But he also knew that the roads were mined by the Germans. But my father figured, well, they're tank mines, so maybe if people step on them or touch them, nothing would happen. So he decided to crawl on his hands and knees in the direction and feel for mines. And it was completely dark. And he went a couple of 100 feet when, well, I'm going to let him say what happened next.
All of a sudden, I saw shadows on the side of the streets jumping up towards me, and they were Germans. They grabbed me, and one of them asked me, "Who are you?" I said, "I don't understand German." I told them in Dutch. One of them could speak apparently a little bit of Dutch and said, where are you going? I said, "Over there, I live over there." Just about that time, all hell broke loose. The British may have been maybe a few hundred yards away. They heard the noise. Machine gun fire came into our direction. The Germans started jumping into their hole on the side. One of them grabbed me, tried to pull me through. I managed to get loose and ran back where I came from. Unafraid of mines, of anything. Everybody was shooting at me. It was pitch dark. Nobody hit me.
So my father ran to the house of one of the sons of the buyers, and it turned out all the buyers were there because the bridge that separated Rubenforst from Germany had been bombed. Now, the next morning, an armored car approached, and my father heard the soldiers speaking English. So he asked them, "Oh, is the village liberated?" And they said, "No, that there's still, this is still the front line, that there's still German snipers here." And that just at that time, the Germans started shooting at the British, and so they turned around and left. But my father did not want to wait around for Rubenforst to be liberated. So he decided to try again to brave that mine-filled road to the liberated village of Zevenum, and he convinced Harry Byers, the youngest son who was in his 20s, to join him on that perilous journey. And I'm going to let my father say what happened next.
I said, "Come on, let's go to the next village," where I knew the British already were. There was gunfire all over the place, but not at us, fortunately. And we made it to the next village, and that was the day of my liberation. The feeling, it's indescribable, of suddenly being able to walk around without fear, with feeling of independence, that now finally I can walk around, I can do whatever I want to do. I don't have to be afraid anymore. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to actually be a soldier.
So he asked the soldiers if he could join them, and they gave him a British uniform and became a translator for the British Army. And Rubenforst was liberated by the soldiers shortly afterwards. About a month or so later, the Jewish Brigade, who were soldiers from the British Mandate of Palestine and part of the British Army, came and asked him if he wanted them to help him go to the British Mandate of Palestine via France. And it was hard for my father to say goodbye to the buyers who were like his family, but he wanted to reunite with his parents. But by the time he arrived in France, he had a high fever and he was taken to a doctor. And the doctor told him, "Oh, it's a good thing you came when you did, because otherwise, if you would have come a day later, I would have had to amputate your leg." My father asked him why, and the doctor said, "Oh, well, you have blood poisoning." But luckily, my father came when he did. He was given medication and he got to keep both of his legs. During this time in France, my father heard the news that the war ended, and he also learned that all of his Dutch relatives had been killed in concentration camps, mostly in Auschwitz. This included his Aunt Annie's family, as well as his 90-year-old great-grandmother, and the Van Stratens, the family with whom he had lived in the Hague for almost 3 years. It included his grandparents, who had fled from Vienna to Belgium, It included his young cousins who went with him on the kinder transport from Vienna to the Netherlands, and their parents. And although the Westerville group had arranged hiding places for about 200 people, 20 of the kids in the Listrecht camp and some counselors were murdered by the Nazis. More than 75% of the Dutch were killed by the Nazis. Of the 140,000 Jews in pre-war Netherlands, only 35,000 survived. In all, 6 million Jews were killed, 960,000 in Auschwitz. The worldwide Jewish population before the Holocaust was 16.6 million, after about 10.6 million. So 60% of Europe's Jews, more than 1/3 of Jews worldwide, were killed. My father, he also learned that his sister was caught while trying to cross the border to safety with Joop Westerville, the head of that underground group. And she was sent to Auschwitz, and he didn't know what happened to her after that for many months. And Joop Westerville was sent to the Dutch concentration camp Wacht, where tragically he was executed in August 1944. And Pastor Vullings, the priest of Clubenvoort, he was arrested by the Nazis, sent to Bergen-Belsen, and he died there in 1945. Now, after the Holocaust, hundreds of thousands of Jewish survivors were unable or unwilling to return to their homes because of post-war anti-Semitism and the destruction of their communities. And those who did return often found their homes taken over, and some were even killed by their former neighbors. And so as a result, many survivors ended up in displaced persons camps administered by the Allies. And after the horrors of the Holocaust, many people felt that only a Jewish homeland could guarantee the safety of the Jewish people. And for thousands of years, since ancient Israel was destroyed and many Jews exiled from the land, Jews had prayed to return to their national homeland of Israel, and now they yearned even more for that dream to become a reality. And my father was able to immigrate there because that's where his parents lived. So he went on a British military ship and arrived there in July 1945. And they took him to the Etlit refugee camp. And a day later, my grandfather arrived. And my father wondered why his mother didn't come too. And sadly, he learned that his mother had passed away just 2 weeks before his first letter arrived saying that he had survived. So she never knew. And my grandparents had started a jam factory in Tel Aviv. So my father began working there, and pretty soon he took over the operations. And about a month or so later, he received a letter from his sister Taya saying that she was alive, she had survived Auschwitz and a death march, because when the Russians were advancing on the concentration camps, the Nazis had forced the prisoners to evacuate and march over large distances under harsh conditions, and many people died. But luckily, Taya survived. And she later joined my father and grandfather in the British Mandate of Palestine. And on November 29th, 1947, the UN voted to partition the land into 2 parts, one for the Jews and one for the Arabs. The Jews supported this, the Arabs did not, and escalated their attacks against the Jews. So my father joined the Haganah, a Jewish self-defense force that provided defense against these attacks. And as you all know, on May 14th, 1948, the British left the area. The Jews issued a Declaration of Independence establishing the State of Israel. That same day, armies from 5 Arab countries attacked Israel, and the Secretary General of the Arab League conveyed the Arabs' intentions against the Jews when he threatened to, quote, say that this will be a war of annihilation. It will be a momentous massacre in history, end quote. And so my father joined the Israeli army and helped to successfully establish the State of Israel. And during one of my father's military operations, he was injured and ended up unconscious and in a coma for a few days. But fortunately, he recovered and he was discharged from the army as a wounded veteran. And at the time, resources were scarce. So the jam factory wasn't working out that well. And he decided, well, what am I going to do? And he always wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. So he decided to look into following that dream. But he found out you needed a university education, but he'd gone up to 6th grade. But then he found out that if he passed the University of London entrance exam, then he could apply to any university. So he studied and passed it. And then he found out that the best universities in the world for aeronautical engineering were in the United States. So he decided to go there. So first he went to Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia. and he was 24, and the rest of the kids were 18. So this was in 1951. And so he graduated in 3 years, top of his class. And then he went to Princeton for his master's, and he actually met Albert Einstein there and had a nice conversation with him in German. Then he went to work in Philadelphia, where he met my mother, Ruth, who was from Massachusetts, and they were married the following year. And then he decided to go to the University of Pennsylvania. He got a PhD in aeronautical engineering. He founded a successful company, which made a number of inventions, one of which was an image stabilization system that won a Scientific and Technical Academy Award. He sold his company, and as part of the deal to run the West Coast office, he moved the family to Los Angeles, and he subsequently founded a few other successful businesses. And then he convinced my aunt and her family and my grandfather to move to Los Angeles as well. And my parents were married for 62 years, and they have 4 children and 5 grandchildren. And our family and the Byers family are still very close. The Byers were the ones that hid him for over a year. And we try and visit each other as much as possible. For example, Harry's son Hank lived with us for 5 years. And my sister and I lived in the Grubenforst village for a summer. And more recently, Hank's children, so the great-grandchildren of Peter and Gertrude, lived with me for several months. And in a week and a half, the great-grandchild's coming, and we're going to visit them in a couple months. And so this is a picture with our families. And in 2005, my father, with Mincha Byers, and she lived to over 100. And so the Byers parents, Pastor Vullings, Joop Westerville, and the Westerville group were all were recognized as righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. And I wanted to share the hope and message my father had for the future.
My hope is that humanity has learned that people in the final analysis were brought onto this earth not to kill each other, but to live with each other in peace. And that regardless of religion or background or whatever, wherever they come from, people are still people. And instead of hating each other, they should love each other and do things for each other. And if humanity could only learn that from all the experiences which unfortunately our generation went through in the Holocaust, maybe we finally will have learned something. That is my hope for the future.
So, as you heard, my father's story touches upon a number of universal themes. And one is the importance of resilience and determination. And we believe that when people observe the determination and resilience of my father, how despite all of the hardships he had to endure, that he was not only able to survive, but to succeed, that this will inspire others to face any obstacles in their life and to be encouraged that they can have a good life afterwards. Another theme is the importance of helping others. My father always focused on the positive about the people helping him rather than those trying to kill him. Whenever we share a story, we highlight these courageous people who risk their lives to save him. And so his story has a positive call to action that inspires people to be upstanders rather than bystanders when they see injustices. And another theme is the importance of possessing tolerance, compassion, and empathy for people of all faiths and backgrounds. And another theme is the importance of possessing, is about the value of education. Because of my father's emphasis on education, by continuing to learn while in hiding, by earning a PhD, and becoming an award-winning scientist and successful businessman, despite not attending 7th through 12th grade, my father serves as a great role model, motivating people to continue their education. So all of these themes are more important now than ever. I'm not really sure why. I don't know if you see all this green on the screen. I'm not sure what happened there, but hopefully you can read it. And so, especially with anti-Semitism on the rise, as you know, in 2022, the American Jewish community experienced the highest level of anti-Semitic incidents in decades. And so sharing my father's story is not just about learning about the past. It's about hopefully inspiring people to do the right thing in the present and in the future. And because these lessons are timeless, my father and I decided to continue to share his story in multiple ways. After he began writing about his story, I decided to edit and published it. his autobiography. It's called Determined, the Story of Holocaust Survivor, Avraham Perlmutter. And the award-winning book is available on Amazon and in museums and libraries. We also published the book in Dutch with the help of the buyers. I also created an award-winning documentary. It had its world premiere in 2020. It's been showed to film festivals and schools and other organizations. Just last week for Yom HaShoah, it was shown at Sinai Temple. And it's available on Vimeo on demand. And actually through April 30th, it's available if people want to know the link and the Vimeo link and password, they can email me afterwards. I'll give you a link. And I also developed a study guide to accompany the film and the book to enable people to relate my father's story to their own lives and to the contemporary world. And for many years, we shared the story to thousands of people at museums and schools and other organizations. And I think it's especially important to do now, since sadly, my father passed away this past August, just 1.5 years before his 95th birthday. 1.5 weeks before his 95th birthday. And so you can find out more about my father's story and how we share it at our website, determinedstory.com. And as I mentioned, you can email me at determinedstory@gmail.com. Well, thank you for listening to my father's story. And now if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Wow.
Thank you, Keren. Thank you, Keren, for this presentation. I have no words, but this is a story will always stay forever, that you are bringing up the awareness for the young generation. I'm going to open for few QAs. Please let me know if you have any questions for Keren.
Julie does.
I don't know that I have a question. I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing this story about your father and family and so forth. Yeah, I have to take a breath of air because it really hits hard. Oh my goodness. I think because your father is older than me, but I was a baby, an infant, around the time that your father was going through all of these experiences. And even growing up, I really didn't know very much about my father's family at all. And they came from Hungary. And it was only, I'd say in the last 10 years that I found out that they were all taken to Auschwitz. And it was my father's brother's family. And then since then, we've done a whole genealogy of the family, so we know, what happened. My son, well, I'm going to stop now because I'm not asking a question. I'm getting into a whole other thing. But thank you so much for your presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing your story. And one thing I did mention is that, a lot of my father's parents, they actually came over from the Poland, Ukraine, Lvov area in 1919, because after the Austria-Hungarian Empire broke up, a lot of Jews went to Vienna. And so they still had a number of relatives in that area. And so all of them were killed, the ones that had stayed in Poland and Ukraine.
Could I just, one more thing? I'm sorry, and then I'll stop. I just remember my grandmother came from the Ukraine. And so when you said that, it just strikes the thought in my mind. Do you know about any of your grandparents living in Boyle Heights at any point in time? I remember my grandmother telling me that she had friends that were the Perlmutters.
Oh,
that's why
no, the only Perlmutter, the grandparent, was my father's father, Chaim Perlmutter, and then he moved from Israel to Los Angeles in the 1970s. But other Perlmutters, there aren't that many Perlmutters that we know. There's one that ended up in Sweden, so that one's related. But most of the time, the answer is no. When people say, "Are you related to this Perlmutter or that Perlmutter?" Because the Perlmutters mostly, or at least on the male side, stayed in Poland, and so that, you know, they were killed. Some of the women, you know, were married and were able to go to the United States, but then their last name isn't Perlmutter anymore.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then Lauren, I see a hand.
Actually,
Oh, or David. actually,
David has hand
right,
up.
sorry. Yes.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, Keren, about sort of the secret sauce of survival. You know, a lot of us will ask, you know, what would I do if this were to happen to me in my lifetime? And some of the things you've revealed about your father suggest to me that he may have had a very good mix of talents, especially if you look at the post-war experience. You know, successful academically, successful in business, successful in health. You mentioned his spirit of optimism. What do you think are some of the components to his personality and, you know, his brain strength that he was blessed with that helped contribute to him being a survivor when so many other people did not make it through, even though they tried?
Right. So you mentioned some. So I would say determination, the optimism, you know, so he's always looking forward, always trying to think, okay, what do I need to do? You know, he was religious, so he believed that an angel of God was watching over him. He was wild and mischievous. He was very intelligent. And as people always say, you know, he knew to make the right decision, you know, like somehow he just knew, well, I need this, not safe here. I need to escape. And he had courage. I mean, what you were saying about, would you, like, if you were in the same situation, I mean, I don't, you know, if I was in the Jewish theater, would I want to stay or would I want to run? Because as the Cohen son said, but if they, what the Cohen son, the reason he didn't want to escape was because he said, well, if they catch me, they're going to shoot me right there. So maybe it's safer not to stay. But my father, you know, he was just always looking forward. What do I need to do? What do I need to do? And an angel of God was watching over him. And also so many people helped him. And he was just lucky in approaching the right people. Sometimes people have asked me, so did he ever go up to the wrong person? And I said, no, we always ask the right people. You know, when he said, I'm Jewish, the Nazis are after me, can you help me? And they always said yes. He did have interactions with Nazis. One time when he was in with the buyers and he was hiding in a hole, and he went out of the hole, and a German soldier came out of the house and he ran into him. The German soldier said, oh, who are you? And my father said, oh, I'm one of the sons. And the soldier said, well, you have dark hair. And he said, oh, well, one of my brothers does too. And luckily one of the buyers' sons also had dark hair. And so my father started talking to the Nazi, and the Nazi was complaining about being from the Eastern Front. It was terrible. And my father said, oh, well, why don't you just end the war by getting rid of Hitler? And the Nazi looked at him and said, what? My father realized it was not a smart thing to do. You know, he was 17 at the time. And he quickly excused himself and ran away. And luckily, the soldiers were replaced the next morning and didn't investigate who the teenager was. So he did have...
But it sounds like, Keren, you're saying that he had an innate sense to assess people, and in a mere moment be able to determine, you know, the sense of that person's character, if they can be trusted or not. And that's an extremely valuable skill set in life in general. A lot of people, you know, are gullible, or they're taken in by scams, and they don't have that depth of knowledge that it sounds like your father had, which again may be a contribution to the secret sauce that allowed him to succeed, that may not allow most lay people to succeed.
Yeah, that's a good point. Right. He had good judgment, and that's, in order to be able to know who to approach. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Oh, Lauren had a question.
Lauren?
Actually, I just had a comment, and that was that, you know, we hear a lot of Holocaust survivor stories, and I have personally always been fascinated by the righteous Gentiles. And so it's so interesting to me that in your story, you focus so much on those people that helped him, and that he relied so much upon them, and how he really, really saw that, because it is just fascinating to me that these people just risked their lives simply because they did not understand this injustice, not supported at all. Like, they didn't have this great big philosophical, you know, diatribe that they went into as to why they helped people. It was just, they didn't think that it was right, and it was just a core feeling they had in them. And it is just a fascinating thing to me. And so many lives, such as your father's, completely relied upon other people having that inside of them.
Right, exactly. And, my father, he always, like I said, focused on the positive. So this is how, whenever he told his story, he always highlighted them. And so I do the same. I follow in the way my father conveyed the story. And you're right. I mean, these people risked their lives because they thought it was the right thing to do. And then, as you saw, some people lost their lives because of it.
Right.
And very admirable. And, we're so grateful to all of these people and to the Byers family. And like I said that, we consider them our family. And when we can, they actually join in Q&As and talks as well from the Netherlands, like for my whenever they are available, they join as well. And it really shows also all the kids and grandkids and great grandkids, they have such wonderful values that they acquired, through modeling of their great grandparents or their grandparents or their parents. And it's really admirable to see. And it also shows that an act of kindness, not only affects the person who's receiving the act of kindness or the person giving it, but affects many generations later. And I think that's a very powerful concept for people to think, because a lot of times they think, well, I'm just going to help you in the moment, not realizing 80 years from now, people are still going to truly appreciate it. And it's going to impact not only the descendants who will live, I'm here because of them, but also because the descendants of the people who are helping, they, like I said, they emulate what their ancestors did. So it's a very powerful concept, I think. So thank you.
Karen, we've got time for one more question. Scott Schmierson.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I was at Temple Sinai to watch your film and listen to the lecture, and when I got home, I was thinking so much about what you said about your father's accomplishments. Hadn't gone to school, but yet earned his bachelor's, master's, and PhD. And I thought to myself, if this Holocaust had never happened, how different the world would have been with all the brilliant people, all the brilliant minds. This would have been heaven on earth had these people not been killed and were able to use their knowledge and do good for everyone. And it's because what you told me about your father that I thought, what a different place we would be in today. So I appreciate that, Karen.
Yeah, thank you. And I've thought about that many times. I mean, what the contributions that could have been made by all these people who were killed. And even, a number of Holocaust survivors became Nobel Prize winning winners in different fields. And so, yeah, I mean, that was a great loss to the world and what it could have been without all of these people.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Karen, I want to take this moment and to say it's been a great honor to have you with us tonight. And of course, it's been truly humbling moment for you to introduce your father experience. We should never stop, and we should continue to share this with every youth and young generation. I would like to thank you, and I would like also to thank the Museum of Tolerance for helping us to put this event together, and we will continue working together. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
I'm going to move to Miss Colleen Schwab to introduce the next speaker. Colleen, the floor is for you.
Thank you. And thank you again, Karen. What a presentation. I've heard we can't stop learning enough, that's for sure. And I can't agree more with Moran, how we have to keep this story going with our future generations, for sure. And so now, ladies and gentlemen, we have the distinct pleasure of having Melissa Giller join us from the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, who is very instrumental in getting the Auschwitz exhibit, which I saw 2 weeks ago. Amazing. I use that term loosely, but it's just so powerful. And Ms. Giller is the Chief Marketing Officer for the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. And I cannot tell you how much we appreciate your time here tonight. And I see you have Air Force One behind you.
I do.
So thank you also for joining us. And I'm sure you enjoyed Karen's presentation as well.
Yeah,
Her
it's
life story. Wow.
very hard to
So-
follow that. I'm gonna
Yeah.
attempt to share my screen. Let's see if this. Are you able to see that?
Yes.
So actually the way Keren ended her presentation is a really good segue into ours. We have a traveling exhibition right now, thank you, Colleen, called Auschwitz Not Long Ago, Not Far Away. And the creator of the exhibition in the early 2000s, when he was only 25 years old, lost his brother unexpectedly. He'd passed away, and obviously he was devastated. And for his birthday, a friend gave him Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And this gentleman was so moved, and he's not Jewish. And the man was so moved by this book that he knew he had to share the story of the Holocaust and Auschwitz specifically with the world, because not everyone can travel to Poland to see Auschwitz or travel to Europe to see the various concentration camps to make sure the education continues. So he wanted to make sure he could take the education of the camps and travel that to the world. So it was 2017, and I'm just making, there we go. It was 2017, and we were reading the New York Times, and we came across an article talking about how Auschwitz artifacts were going to go on tour in late 2017 from this company in Spain. And me being American, I send an email in English to this Spanish company, just hoping he'll see it, hoping that they can read English, not knowing what's going to happen. And about a day and a half later, he actually responded. And we've been in correspondence since 2017 to bring his exhibition to the Reagan Library. Flash forward to 2023, March of 2023, and we finally got it. The exhibition is traveling to 7 cities before all of the artifacts return back to Poland. And you can see here, it started in Spain, went to New York, went to Kansas City Union Station, went to Malmo, Sweden, is now at the Reagan Library, and then is going to 2 locations in North America yet to be announced before all the artifacts return. So you can see we are the only location, and the 2 North American are both East Coast. So we are the only location anywhere really west of the Mississippi. So if you live drivable, and that could be Colorado or Las Vegas or Arizona, we really recommend that you come to the Reagan Library to see this exhibition. It's quite extraordinary. The exhibition has 700 artifacts, 400 of which come from Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum itself. And then the rest come from about 20 other institutions. There also are about 400 photographs. There's also probably 4 or 5 dozen drawings. Many survivors, after being liberated, couldn't talk about their experiences, so they drew their experiences. And the drawings are some of the most haunting things I've ever seen. And they are surrounding the entire 12,500 square foot exhibition to really tell the story firsthand from those who survived. Just some of the artifacts include an authentic boxcar that was used to transport goods to Auschwitz, as well as Jews to Auschwitz. I should point out that the exhibition is about the Holocaust as a whole. It is also about the Nazi rise, the rise of the Nazi Party, but it does then specifically hone in on Auschwitz. Keren sort of shared the numbers as well, but 1.1 million people died in Auschwitz, 1 million of which, almost 1 million of which were Jewish. It was the biggest death camp of all the concentration camps. One of the stories our exhibition shares is how when the Holocaust sort of started and the Nazi rise started and Adolf Hitler started, it began with the annihilation of the Jews at their location, meaning the Nazis went to the Jewish homes, the Jewish businesses, into the streets, and killed the Jews that way. And when they realized it was taking too long, that's when sort of the advent of the concentration camps began. And then, of course, the ones like Auschwitz that had the gas chambers and the crematorium in them. We talk about that in depth at the Reagan Library exhibit. There's an actual barracks from the Auschwitz-Monowitz camp. There's prisoner uniforms, guard uniforms. We have a pair of SS jack boots with a quote over it that basically says, because Dr. Mengele chose to volunteer at many of the selection processes because he was looking for twins, right? We talk about that in the exhibition. So many people, when they got off the trains, were faced with Dr. Mengele. And if they survived, what they remembered were the jackboots, because their heads were down, their eyes were down, and all they remember were the shiny jackboots. And we have some of those boots on display as well. There's even an authentic Pablo Picasso drawing. Post-liberation, Pablo Picasso was in Poland for an event and visited the liberated camp. And 7 years later, drew an Auschwitz survivor. And that drawing became the poster for the 10th anniversary of the liberation. And that drawing for the poster is in the exhibition. And then, of course, personal items, letters and testimonials from the survivors. So just to kind of put meaning behind some of that, this is our train car. It is outside. They can prove and authenticate that it is a World War II era train car. It doesn't, there's no proof that it actually was used specifically for transporting Jews, but they can prove it was from World War II. We've had many survivors come out to the Reagan Library and see this exhibition, and a handful of them have shared stories with us about what it was like to be in the train cars. They'll never forget the smell. And the feeling of being overwhelmed and all of that. And so just to be able to hear those stories is pretty incredible. The exhibition has hundreds and hundreds of personal items. As you all know, they were told they were being deported, they packed their bags, and then when they got off the trains, those bags were taken from them and they were never reunited with their items again. What this gentleman is looking at is a woman's red dress shoe from an unknown deportee arriving in Auschwitz. The gentleman looking at the shoe is 95-year-old Auschwitz survivor David Lenga. He's done a handful of things with us. We'll talk about him a little bit later in the presentation, but he toured the exhibition twice now. And it's just extraordinary to have these survivors in our exhibition because they give it so much more meaning. This is the barracks I was talking about, a portion of the barracks from Auschwitz-Monowitz. In the far back left corner, you can see some prisoner uniforms. All of the material for the prisoner uniforms were made at Ravensbrück, which is, thank you, which was the women's concentration camp. And then that fabric, linen material was sent to some of the camps that had the larger camps that had the tailor shops where the uniforms were actually made. At Auschwitz, prisoners were given the uniforms taken off the dead bodies from the people just before they arrived that had been killed or had died on their own. And if at Auschwitz they ran out of uniforms, they would actually use civilian clothes marked with badges and paint. We have actual fence posts from Auschwitz, the fence posts that were electrified to keep the prisoners inside the camps. We have an actual ballot. When Adolf Hitler ran, he ran unopposed. So your only choice to vote was Adolf Hitler. And just to the right of it, and you can't see it in the picture, but just to the right of this ballot in the exhibition, we have some videos running of Hitler's sort of rise to power. The exhibition has 50 audio stops, and about 24 of those audio stops are actually videos that play within the exhibition. The audio wand is a mandatory requirement for the exhibition to be able to experience the exhibit. Within the Auschwitz Monowitz barracks, we have a section on the medical experiments. This is an actual medical operating table, and just at the foot of it is some of the operating instruments. But of course, the word operating is not the right word to use. They weren't operating, they weren't helping the prisoners. They were what they were calling medical research, which was really medical torture. Just off to this section, if you were looking at the exhibit, to the right of it, it goes into Dr. Mengele more in depth and how much zeal he had to study twins. And we talk a lot about the twins. We even have a sweater of a 5-year-old twin boy that was found in the Canada area of Auschwitz, which is where all of the personal items were taken. He actually, both him and his brother did survive. And the gentleman whose sweater it was is now 86, living in Israel. And it was shared with him that his sweater is on display. The sweater is on loan from us from Yad Vashem, which is one of the 20 lenders. This is the section on Canada, which I just mentioned. again, I think most of you are probably familiar with that, but Canada with a K, not a C, is what the area known in Auschwitz, where all the personal items were taken, all the suitcases, the luggage, the bags, and then they were rummaged through and separated, clothing, jewelry, hairbrushes, kitchen utensils, whatever it may be. We were told this story from a gentleman who works at Auschwitz-Birkenau that often the SS soldiers would go through the clothing and find these silk blouses and bring them home for their wives. But the wives wouldn't wear the silk blouses because if they put on the blouse, they'd be touching the button that a Jewish woman touched. So then the SS guards would take the blouses to tailor shops and have the buttons replaced, and then brought the blouses home to their wives. So just horrifying stories like that that you learn within the exhibition. When the camps were liberated, a lot of the Nazi soldiers tried to destroy the evidence. And we have a handful of sections on that, burning photos, burning utensils, burning any evidence they could find. And in the rubble of the camps, when the Allies were going through the camps post-liberation, they found melted and mangled metal and silverware and tools and things of that nature that the Nazis had tried to destroy. And that's in the exhibition toward the post-liberation section. The exhibition throughout the entire thing along the walls are survivor testimonials. And when you finish the entire exhibition and you're just about to leave, this is the testimonial you see before you walk out of the exhibition. And I find it to be the most overarching theme of why it's so important to learn about the Holocaust, to not forget about the Holocaust, to remember those who lost their lives in the Holocaust, and what we can do as survivors today to honor their memory. We had a survivor out on April 2nd. She was only 5 years old when she was taken to Auschwitz. She was put in the children's barracks. The entire barracks was taken to the gas chamber. Her mother told her what it was. She knew at 5 years old she was walking to her death. They walked into the gas chamber. They were stripped of their clothes, the whole thing put inside the room. Doors were locked, and they waited and they waited and they waited and they waited. And apparently it malfunctioned, and they were let back out and put back into their barracks, and she survived. And she said to us, "I tell my story so that it can become your story. And by becoming your story, it can continue." And really, that's the purpose of this exhibition, to make sure that these stories are never forgotten. You know, listening to Keren talk, right? She's sharing the story of her father. Her father can't talk and share a story anymore. So now Keren's doing it for him. And that's really the reason of this exhibition. So just as Keren shares her father's story, we are doing the same thing. So we have interviewed over 24 people. This is just a small sample. We have about another dozen scheduled that are either survivors themselves. So the woman on the far left was actually at a concentration camp in Indonesia. She was a Dutch Jew. The woman on the bottom left, her father was taken to a camp. Bottom middle, that's David Lange, the 95-year-old Auschwitz survivor. The top middle, those the gentleman, both his father survived Auschwitz, his mother survived a different camp. And so we are getting all of these stories as video testimonials and playing it on youtube.com/Reagan Foundation, which is our YouTube channel. Like I said, we've done 24 already. Every other week, we're posting another one. I think there's 5 or 6 posted right now. We will continue to do these interviews. And again, it's just one more way for us to help survivors and family members of survivors tell these very, very important stories. One of the other things we are doing is programming to go along with the exhibition. The photo you're seeing on the right, just this past Monday, a week ago, was Yom HaShoah. And so we brought out David Lange, that 95-year-old Holocaust survivor, and we brought in 1,000 students, and we paid for their buses, and we paid for their admission tickets to go see the exhibition. And David shared his story with those 1,000 students. And they were middle school and high school students, and they were so quiet and so respectful. And after he told his story, they asked the most beautiful questions. again, that's why we're doing this exhibition. On June 12th, we're doing a conversation with Eva Schloss. If you're familiar with her, she is Anne Frank's stepsister. She survived the camps, and she's spent her life telling Anne Frank's story. But about a dozen years ago or so, she decided that not that she would not stop telling Anne Frank's story, but that when she went into the camp, her last conversation with her brother was her brother was an artist, and her brother Heinz said to her, "If I don't survive the camps, please share my art and the history of my art with the world." And so now Ava's life, and she's 93, now her life is dedicated to share the story of Heinz. So June 12th happens to be Anne Frank's birthday, which is why we're doing the event with her on the 12th, and we'll talk a little bit about Anne, but we're really going to be talking about Heinz. June 14th, we're doing a documentary screening. This is a gentleman who survived the camps and then post-liberation shared his story via drawings, and those drawings have become a documentary. On July 25th, we're doing a Auschwitz survivor conversation with Selena Karp. She was in Auschwitz for 2 weeks, and she was actually saved because she was on Schindler's List. And so she'll be telling her story. And then on August 8th, we're doing a documentary screening. Ava's Promise is Eva Schloss, and it's a film about her dedication, promise to Heinz to tell his story. And this is just a small sample of all the different programs we're doing. They're all free. We live stream them all, so if you can't come in person, again, I know I'm repeating myself, but the purpose of all of this is really to make sure we're sharing as many stories as we can of Holocaust survivors and their family members, because it's about more than just the 12,000 square feet within the exhibition. It's about the story as a whole and keeping the memory alive of all of those people who lost their lives. The screen's showing really weird. It's supposed to say reaganlibrary.com/Auschwitz, but that's how you learn more about the exhibition, how you purchase tickets. Tickets do need to be purchased in advance because we are selling out. We would hate for someone to drive in from Los Angeles or Pasadena or the Valley or wherever you might live and then find out there's no tickets. We're completely sold out every weekend. We were sold out the first 3 weeks in its entirety, Monday through Sunday. So if anyone has interest seeing it or sharing with someone to come see it, we really recommend buying your tickets in advance to guarantee that when you do come up to the library, you're guaranteed admittance. And that is really the exhibition. We thank you for letting us share the story, and we hope that as many of you as possible come just to keep these stories going.
Well, we thank you. We thank you. I didn't realize you had all this continued community outreach and 1,000 students, because we were talking about it earlier before we began tonight, how important it is to teach the next generation about these so that this does not die and so that this doesn't hopefully happen again.
What
an amazing effort you guys are doing.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that was really important to us is that we have been raising sponsorship dollars for the exhibition, and those sponsorship dollars are going specifically to pay for students. So yes, we did 1,000 for that one event, but I think there's currently about 7,500 students that are booked for free. And the more we raise, the more we will continue to bring schools in for free, as many Title I schools as possible. But they don't have to be Title I schools because they're not learning this in the classroom. And so it's really important to bring them in.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is amazing with the two of you.
I want to thank Melissa. I want to thank for all your strenuous efforts to our community and to our society. But as you know, Melissa, she's the Chief Marketing Officer for the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. And Ms. Giller has helped secure the special exhibition based at the library, helping make the Reagan Library the most visited museum in the presidential system. She also launched the foundation on all social media platforms, and she manages its growth. She helped plan and execute multiple presidential debates and both President and Mrs. Reagan's Reagan Library funeral. And finally, Ms. Giller holds a Master of Business Administration from Pepperdine University, as well as a Bachelor of Arts in Communication from UC Santa Barbara. Before I open up to any QA, I would like also to acknowledge that the LUSD approved a resolution to remember and honor the Holocaust. This resolution was sponsored by our board vice president, Mr. Scott Schmerson, and co-sponsored by all the board members in attendance, which held in January 27 as International Holocaust Remembrance Day and remembering the week of all April for the remembrance. I would like to thank Mr. Scott Schmerson for all his efforts. And now I would like to open up the questions for anyone. Please, you may raise your hand.
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Can you tell me how long will the exhibit be at the Reagan Library?
Yeah, thank you. It's running through August 13th of this year.
Thank you very much. It was a beautiful presentation, informative.
Thank you.
David, is your hand up?
Yes. So,
Go ahead.
Melissa, by the way, it was just announced on Friday that the second debate for the Republicans is going to be at the Reagan Library. Was that your doing?
We've been working on it since the last debate cycle, so I was part of it, yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It was very impressive the way you handled the two-night affair the last go-around 4 years ago. Curious about ages to go there. Have you seen any type of reaction, any recommendation about what would be the minimum age that you would advise to bring with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're seeing families bringing children of all ages. The creator of the exhibition has really recommended 12 years of age and older, so middle school and up, because there's no gratuitous imagery of violence or death, but there are a lot of drawings from people who drew their remembrances of the Holocaust, drawings of the beatings, drawings of what they remember from the crematorium or the gas chambers. And then there's a section on, obviously it wasn't just Jews that were targeted, it was anyone that the Nazi Party deemed as undesirable. So whether that's, a political dissident, an African-American, a homosexual, whatever it may be. And so there's a section on that. So there's some pictures of homosexuality in the exhibit as well. So just depending upon your comfort level as a parent, but the exhibition creators recommend 12 and above.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Any other questions?
Since there aren't any other questions, Melissa, you talked about the high demand for the tickets. Do you expect the high demand to further increase as we approach the middle of August?
Yes, so this exhibition sells out everywhere it goes. At Kansas City Union Station, when it closed, the last 4 weeks before it closed, they extended their hours 3 hours a day, every day for 4 weeks. And they still had a waiting list of 6,000 people who were not able to buy tickets. So we are expecting something similar. So the first 3 weeks we were open, it was opening week. It was the 2 or 3 weeks surrounding spring break, and we were sold out every single ticket, every single day. Right now, Monday through Friday, we're like 50 to 60% sold out, but Saturdays and Sundays, 100% sold out. So I do recommend Monday through Friday. But we're figuring that once we hit Memorial Day, once we hit Memorial Day through the close of August, that we'll probably be sold out every day.
Can we interpret that as a good thing, that people want to come and keep more? I'm taking that as a good thing.
It is. For the Reagan Library itself, we've really been struggling post-COVID. We've always, as you guys said earlier, we're the most visited presidential library. Pre-COVID, it was about 400,000 visitors a year. Most presidential libraries get 100 to 200,000 people a year. And since reopening, we were closed for 14 months. And since reopening, we've been sitting at like 250,000 people a year. And so this exhibition is going to bring us back to pre-COVID numbers. So for the library itself, it's a wonderful thing. But that aside, for the community, for schools, for education, we're just so thrilled that we're selling out, because it means people are interested in getting out and seeing important things.
Yeah, that's good. And to think this came from one man who wanted to, and where did you say he was from? Could you go back to that?
He's from Spain.
Yes, I thought it was Spain.
He was like 25 years old and was so moved by the story of this Auschwitz survivor that he knew he had to tell it in a larger way. It's quite remarkable.
It is. Yeah. That was the first place it went. It was in Spain.
Yes, correct. So it opened in Madrid. He's from like San Sebastian or something like that.
I know exactly where it is. Yep. Yeah. Beautiful city. Mm-hmm. That's great. That's an amazing story. I didn't know that. That's just, wow.
Well,
what he's done.
Keren and Melissa, I really want to thank you both again. This has been very valuable. We did record it. We'll put it up on both our webpage, and we have a YouTube channel as well to help spread the message. But thank you so much, and we will encourage people to read the book. We will encourage people to visit the exhibit as well.
I have to say, my temple, we're in a book club, and our next book is going to be determined.
Thank you. I'm happy to do a Q&A when your group meets, with your book club, if you would like.
Oh, of course. Thank you. Melissa, thank you.
And as I said, the documentary is now available. If anyone wants to have the link and the password, you can, just.
Oh, that would be nice to see too.
I can't do it right now, but what I'll do is I'll just put my email here, and then you can email me, and then it's available through April 30th. So my email here, shermanstory@gmail.com.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I would like to say thank you, first of all, to Ms. Keren Perlmutter and Melissa Giller for their introduction. This has been such a journey to go through the painful incidents that happened during the Holocaust, but this was a good wake-up call and educational and informative. I would like also to thank our president, Mr. Greg Solowitz. I would like also to take this opportunity and to thank my education committee, Ms. Janet Luker and Colin Schwab, and also Victoria Solowitz in Israel, and also David Harprin. They all worked on the technicality and to post the event on all our social media. I also dropped our Facebook page in our chat book. Please like and follow and check out our page, as we are going to continue to bring more events coming soon, and please stay in touch. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your participation, and I wish you a good night.